no story has a structure of problem, opportunity, competition, product, solution. I've never heard it set works that way. So my mental model around getting people to do something that you want is that everyone makes decisions the same way, which is they make decisions based on emotions, how they feel.
I am joined today by Siqi Chen. Siqi is the founder and CEO of Runway, which is a next-generation financial planning and analysis platform that makes finance actually understandable and accessible to the entire team. But that's not the reason I wanted to invite him on here. I think you're one of the best startup storytellers that I know. I've heard you in real time listen to other founders' pitches and basically rephrase them into a way that's far more compelling. So my first question is, as a founder trying to raise money, what is a good story?
So a flip answer, and I think but is important, is that a good story is a story. That's really quite important. Most stories in the content of fundraising are not stories at all. A founder takes the 10-slide template that they found online and fills in the blanks. That no story has a structure of problem, opportunity, competition, product, solution. I've never heard it set works that way. Why should it be a story? And why is that important? And why also should you not use all of these 10-slide templates that every VC fund says, well, this is what you want? So my mental model around getting people to do something that you want is that everyone makes decisions the same way, which is they make decisions based on emotions, how they feel. Any rational thought comes as a rationalization after. But we're moved by feelings. And stories are humankind's time-tested way of delivering these emotions. It's a vehicle. It's the best vehicle we have, the best technology we have to deliver these emotions. Now, given that, why then should you take a risk of not using these templates that every VC says that you should? The reason why is because it comes from an investor. The incentives of an investor is very different from the incentives of a founder. The incentives of an investor is, as you know, to invest in the very best companies, and you want to actually quickly pass on the companies that are bad. And these decks probably do that. It's probably the most efficient format for you to do so as an investor. But as a founder, you want people to invest in your company if it's good or bad, and no matter how shitty your company is. You want people to invest in your company no matter what. So those incentives, as you can see, are completely different. And if that's what you want to do, then you want to make it a story, and you want to tell the best story that you can about your business.
Yeah, that strikes me. I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's a very good rationale for why you want to structure your presentation as a story. Then I suppose the next most logical question is then, what does the structure of a good story look like in this context?
So I think people can have their own structures. There's no right answer here. I'll tell you what my structure is. So because I understand that I want to have people feel things, I will literally write down the feelings that I want people to have. So my emotional journey starts with amusement, then it goes to curiosity, then it goes to surprise, then it goes to awe, then it goes to greed. That's the journey I want to take people on. And so breaking that down a little bit,
yeah,
I want you to be amused at the start, because I want you to know that even if you don't invest or learn nothing from this pitch, at least you won't be bored reading it.
Yep.
That leads to curiosity, which is, as you know, one of the great things that you get to enjoy as an investor is you get to learn about the most interesting new things in the world that are so interesting someone's willing to devote the next decade of their lives to. It's always going to be something interesting. So that should spark some curiosity. And that thing that you've discovered about the world should then lead to a sense of surprise, which is, oh, wow, that is actually far more interesting than I expected. That is really cool. So now you've learned something. That surprise leads to awe, which is then you tell the story of the implications of the surprise in the future, where you're like, oh, holy crap, if this works, this could be really quite huge. And that leads to the final emotion that I want to leave you with, which is greed. Like you want
I got to
to
get in on this.
get in on this, right? So that's a specific emotional arc that I want to put people through. And then the structure of a story that would deliver that arc, I consider it a 3-act play. And the structure is very simple. It's your origin story, and Act 2 is a now, and Act 3 is a future. That's it. And, when I work with founders, the way you fill in the blanks is I just ask 3 questions, right? Like the first question for Act 1 is, how did you come to work on what you're working on now? What's the story? So it's not like the world's market is of thingamabob is $2 trillion. No. You were...
God, the bane of my existence is the slide with the three circles.
Yeah, the Venn diagrams.
The top down Sam Som.
Yeah. No, like I was at this place. I was walking down the street. I was in the lab. I was at work, and this is what was happening. This is what I was seeing, and I realized, oh my God, X, right? This is a huge opportunity, really interesting idea. And this roughly corresponds to the problem, opportunity, and team slides. You're telling the story of these things, not in the form of slides, but in the story. So that's the origin story. And you're describing this, there's a few ways of thinking about this. One is like, you're walking down a street and you tripped over a rock made out of solid gold, and the rock is invisible to everyone but you, right? Tell me about the street. Like, what was the rock? Describe it in as much detail as you can. Make me feel, smell, and taste like what was happening that day. And what you want is, at this point, you're not describing your product or your company at all. You're really describing this problem and this almost hole in the universe. And you're describing in such vivid detail that you care about this hole. And you can also imagine the shape of an object that might fill in this hole already before you even talk about the product. So Act 2 is a now, and then you get to talk about the product and how it's going. And at this point, you've already sold me on the problem. So the product is not a surprise. And it's almost like you've read my mind, right? The worst pitches are the ones where you talk about, here's what I'm building, here's a product. It's like, what is it even for?
Yeah.
I don't care.
Why do I care?
Yeah. Right? If you want the actual opposite of that, which is that is so blazingly obvious now that I care about the problem. Of course, yes. How can I give you money to do that? That's great, right? And people sort of try to over-index on how clever and new and it is. And then the second part of Act 2 is how's it going? What are your attractions, numbers? And everyone tries to dress this up in the best possible light, but you actually want to do the opposite. Because what you're trying to convince people of is that you might build one of the best companies in the world, the largest companies in the world. And so there's no amount of traction that looks good to you. And if you have bad traction, it shouldn't look good to you anyway. So, and then Act 3 is the most important bit, because this is what you're actually selling. And this is what founders get confused about, because most operators were so in the day-to-day or focused on what we are doing. And that's what we want to talk about. But we forget that that's not what you're selling, because that's not what people want to buy. People want to buy how this becomes a 100x return, one of the largest companies in the world. And it hasn't happened yet, obviously. So it's important, and it's hard to do so convincingly, but it's also easy in that it's in the future. You can say whatever you want. You just need to go do it, of course.
Yeah.
And this is probably the most important part of your deck, because it's what you're selling. And in most decks, it's like one slide, if that. So that's the structure of the deck. And the limits test is, I think, if you've done a good job, in theory, you should only have one question, which I consider the only good question in fundraising, which is,
how can I invest? There was so much there. I mean, there's so much. I think that's such a great way of thinking about it. One thing I want to put to you, that because I think you sort of a little bit implied that there's a bit of an adversarial relationship in some ways, in that, what the investor wants is like to get the information as quickly as possible that's going to allow them to decide if they're wasting their time or not. And your job, I think you've said this elsewhere, like your job is to get them to invest in your shitty company, like
no matter what.
Yeah, no matter what. And which is true, of course. But I think I've increasingly come to realize, as having spent, I don't know, coming up on 2 years now, and having gone from founder to venture investor, there's really like 4 questions that I'm trying to get answered in any conversation that I have with a founder. And those questions are, why now? And the reason why I care about why now is because venture-backed companies are supposed to be exceptional companies that can deliver exceptionally fast growth and or get to very large scale. And usually, like the only way that's going to happen is usually there's been some change in external circumstances, whether that's technological, regulatory, social, or cultural. Something has changed out there that's unlocked this being the right time. And the rationale there is, there's lots of smart, ambitious people. And so why has this not existed before? Like what's making it possible for it to exist? The second question is, why this, which I think ties to this idea that, you have arrived, you have some hard-won insight, Peter Thiel calls it like the secret, I guess, another way of talking about it, but some hard-won insight that's come to you from, often it's time spent with potential customers is probably the best, one of the best ways, or some other esoteric piece of knowledge that you've uncovered, and that's led you to have a reason for building the specific thing that you're building. And then, the other two questions are, why are you the best person to build this thing? And then how big can this get? Which, ties. And I think actually, I think that you can map pretty easily like that set of questions onto the structure that you're suggesting as something that both parties should be trying to reach. And I think the structure you're outlining is like a really good way of delivering compelling answers to those.
Yeah, it does. It works, at least for me and the companies I work with. So, yeah, I mean, it is a weird thing, right? Like, I didn't mean it to portray it as adversarial. But like, ultimately that's a relationship. Once an investor becomes an investor in your company, that is, investor is part of the team. When you're fundraising, there is a real component of chemistry and, fit and vibes. And at the same time, simultaneously, it's not a zero-sum thing. It's also a business transaction that's determined by market dynamics of supply and demand. And your job is to maximize your demand.
100%. Okay, so I wanted to talk about names, because I think names are very powerful things. And as I say, I think you're someone who's always been very good at. Someone did a piece of research I came across recently. I don't know if you saw this, but they were looking at exit, like the value of companies that exit and their likelihood of exiting, and how it correlated with different name lengths of the company. And this strikes me as one of these things that's like maybe of questionable like sign. If this is a correlation, causation, I don't really know. But one of the conclusions I remember was like, you have the best chance of a good exit if the name of your company is 7 characters or fewer. So you're doing great. You're on track to be a unicorn. You're very safe at six characters.
That's all we need to do. Yeah.
But I suppose like I think here's like my very open-ended question to you: what's in a name, and what's the secret? What's the secret behind do names matter, and how do they matter, and how do you go about finding a good one?
I think they do matter a lot. I don't know how you come up with a really good one. Serious Business was just like, well, what would be funny and memorable, and we made fun games, and what's the opposite of fun games? Serious Business. So like just doing the reverse of things was effective. For Runway, I was going to call it CFO.ai, and I actually currently own CFO.ai and CFO.gg. The first domain was actually CFO.gg. That's because I thought it was going to be a game-like experience. So, but then I talked to one of our investors, our first investor, the first person to offer to write a check, Naval Ravikant, who I think, was also like pretty deep into space back then, right? Through HitForge, before he became a philosopher guru.
Yes.
And I asked him, hey, what should we call our name? And I asked him what he thought of CFO.ai. And he said, don't call it .ai, because everything's going to be AI in like 5 years and it's just going to sound dated.
Yeah.
Why don't you just call Runway and get a .com? So that's what we did.
So the secret of naming is ask Naval Ravikant what you should call your company.
Yeah, if you have a chance to, he's very good at names. I think we raised $5 million and we spent $250,000 on our domain, runway.com. It was, I mean, for that domain, it's like a pretty reasonable price, and the timing was great because used to be owned by a movie production company, and COVID just hit, so they have cancel issues. So,
got it.
Yeah, so we bought that domain, and one of the reasons why we invested so much money is like Paul Graham actually had an essay about this, where like you want the .com, you want the good name, because as a startup, you need every source of credibility that you can.
Yeah.
And so having the runway.com domain in finance in particular says something about the seriousness by which and the reliability of what you're about to do. I think it does matter. Like if you get like a 2-word domain and a .io, I think there is a meaningful element of people not taking you seriously. Like the stats about good names lead to good outcomes. As you mentioned, it is probably more correlation than causation, but I think the correlation matters in that like your ability to come up with a really good name and your ability to get the domain and brand it and own that name is probably correlated with some element of persuasion and skill and grit, right? Like if you do not have that agency, then you're going to use a name and domain that's available to you, and it's going to be like some weird long name that nobody pronounced, and that's because it's what you can get. But if you're extremely high agency, then you're going to go with like the name that you want, and you're going to like get it or die trying. So I think that there is probably like some correlation there in like not willing to settle would be my hypothesis on why there is a correlation.
Yeah, I think also it ladders up into, I think the critical word that in that last few sentences was brand, right? Which is one of the moats that you can build over time for a company. And there's something, a good name, it'll click into someone's head, whereas something that seems a little bit, we find this is something we spend a bit of time, we talk to founders who are, often they're founders from other countries, and they'll pick some like weird name basically. And we've coached some of them into changing their names for exactly the reason that you want it to click into place in people's heads in a comfortable way, and it'll accrue benefit over time, I think. So I think it's such a critical piece of brand is.
And it's so much more than a name. I think like one of the things that I've changed my mind about over time is just the value of brand and marketing. I think a lot of founders, you start off, you want to build a product. You're like, I'm immune to marketing. I don't like commercials, so I'm just going to build the thing. Especially if you're technical, right? But I think it sort of ignores the reality of just how impactful and important and effective brands are, right? Like the people who run Under Armour and Red Bull and Nike are not stupid people. And they spend like $10 billion plus on their brand. There is a reason for it because it works. And it's because people make decisions based on feelings, and these feelings drive purchasing decisions. And the brand is the thing that does that.
Yeah, I remember that Twitter back and forth about shape rotators and,
word cells,
and I think, Silicon Valley, I think there was always a feeling of performance marketing is the only kind of marketing that matters because you can, attach metrics to it and all the rest of it. And brand is just something that like, people like me with English literature degrees who don't really understand how to use a spreadsheet or whatever, or know how to code. That's the thing that they don't understand. And but I think, as you say, I think it's obviously a lot more nuanced than that.
Actually, that mental model has a huge impact on our marketing strategy. What you just said around everyone in Silicon Valley is this shape rotator who's like, I'm going to track everything, and that's the only thing that matters. We're going to growth hack this stuff. We're going to focus on paid acquisition. And like, there's an element of truth to that. But like, as W. Edward Demings, I think, observed really wisely in World War II or post-World War II, like the most important things in business can't be measured, aren't measurable. And both are important. You have to invest in training, you have to invest in brand and marketing. And if you know that most of these tech companies are pouring most of their money in attributable channels, what that probably implies is that those channels are going to be the most overpriced, and there's an arbitrage opportunity for the non-attributable channels. And so that's like our base belief here. And it's like, we're willing to take the lack of measurement because we think everything else is just like way too overpriced.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so I want to switch gears for a little bit, and because there was something else that you said that I think I've been thinking a lot about. Now I sort of receive a lot of investor updates, and one of the things I'm working on at the moment is a kind of guide for what I think makes a good investor update. And I think you said something really important. You talked about honesty, about specifically around what challenges the company face, what has to go right, what things you haven't solved. And I think like one thing I spend a bit of time now trying to urge I find that there's like there's three kinds of investor updates that you get typically. There's one which is you don't get an investor update, which is the worst kind. Then there's the investor update that I would sort of describe as the like kind of PR newsletter where it's like it's the kind of equivalent of like the school newsletter where it's like the team did this and everyone was happy and we had a great day and everyone went home. And it's full of lots of information about hires the company's made, or like look at this win that we had, and so on and so on. And those updates never make me very happy because look, maybe things are all going completely great, but having been a founder for a long time, it's like it's very rare that like everything's going great, and so it makes me immediately paranoid and think what isn't it makes me think two things. One is like what isn't the founder telling me, and like because I don't mean like because I think they're dishonest or like deliberately hiding stuff, but it's more that if what I don't know doesn't I can't be of any I can't help. But the other sort of the deeper problem is it also means you have much less confidence in the founder that they are focused. Good founders, in my experience, are paranoid, and they are holding in their head at any one time. They have a really clear sense of what are the most important things, typically, especially if you're investing very early in a company that has not really achieved product market fit, say, or and what some of my favorite updates are from one of our portfolio companies. For the majority of the time that I've been receiving investor updates from them, the product has not been working, and I said this to the founder, like you write the best. I love receiving your investor updates. It's not because they're full of like great news about exploding revenue or usage or whatever. But the thing that is the reason I think they're such great updates is there's such a sense of clarity about what the challenges are and what the opportunities are in your product, in the way that you're going to market, all these things. And what I really found impressive was a consistency. You could put all those updates next to each other and get a real sense of, okay, well, we sort of thought this, it didn't work for this reason. Now we've realized we're going to have to do this. And I think they're now at the point where they've cracked something really, really important, and it's starting to show up in the numbers. But it was it's I think still quite rare, at least in my experience, to have when a founder has a really strong grasp of that, because that's the journey they're on, it inspires so much confidence. And I think the same thing is perhaps, no one wants to hear in a pitch like, oh, well, here's all the great, here's why everything's going to be great. You also want to understand, does the founder have a grasp on, okay, what are the real challenges here? What have we not worked out? And then how are we going to, we don't expect everything to have been worked out, of course.
Yeah, I agree with that. Makes a lot of sense.
So maybe this is a good time to flip into your experience as an investor, because you've been investing as an angel for a very long time. I think you're an early investor in, I think it's about 100 companies, including some pretty big success stories like 11 Labs, Amplitude, Mercury, Hype. And I suppose my first question is just a very very general one. What have you learned in the decade plus that you've been angel investing? What do you think now that you didn't think when you first started doing this?
I think luck and network just has a tremendous amount of influence. I mean, one of my investments was like almost a 400x return, right? And so whatever I have the other 99 basically doesn't matter,
Yeah.
right? So there's a huge amount of luck in that, and I'm able to access some of these opportunities, whether it's like Mercury or Amplitude, because I was a customer or it was a friend. Naval Ravikant describes like being in Silicon Valley in technology is like living in the gold mine. And you basically, if you're a smart person, you invest in all your friends. I think he's definitely done that, and he's made an unfathomable amount of money probably doing that. And it speaks to the importance of doing something and being in the right place. When we met in 08 and 07, it actually wasn't that cool to do
No.
startups. There wasn't that much money. San Francisco had like basically Yelp, Twitter. This is way before Instagram. Twitter had like a little dinky office in South Park. VC fund had an office in a city, right? It's completely
you had to trek down, do the Sandhill Road thing.
where the real companies and the real money was. But then some of the people that you and I both know, many of them have become billionaires, right? Public company founders, CEOs. And so being in the right place and finding the right people and being with people who are ambitious and smart and want to build something, even if it's like not prestigious, will pay off eventually. I think that's probably the bigger thing. I think over time, my investment philosophy has definitely shifted. I think before I was a lot more prolific in terms of investing. My philosophy is more around like, well, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and if it's a power law, then I might as well invest in like pretty liberal with investments. Over time, I think what I'm starting to see more is outbounding and access. Like there is a serious selection effect with deal flow if you only take inbound, and with the large sample sizes, I can now like have a lot more data on like what is something that is like going to work and are symbols of successful founders. More and more, I am a lot more selective about the vibe of the founder. Previously, if it's like, oh, this is like growing quickly and it's a cool idea that is like interesting, then I might seriously consider writing a check. But now it's more like, could this person eat me? Is like the question I ask myself, right? Like you just get this sense. I remember like one of my investments, he was, I think when I met him, 18 years old out of India. And this guy, Kitsaba, he runs a company called Lumini now. And it's doing great. But I remember distinctly thinking, this 18-year-old kid, I was like, I would not be surprised if I was working for this person one day. Like had that kind of presence and vibe. And so I index a lot more on the personality of the founder, how compelling they are, more so than I have been before, and I'm a lot more selective.
I'd like to dig deeper on that question, because as you said, I agree with you that early stage, so much of what you're doing is trying to very rapidly assess the founder's potential and personality, and often, and I've spent as you have now a couple decades around founders, some of whom have become very successful, and so and one of the things I've been struggling with as I sort of have to now have LPs and have to sort of actually justify like why we did certain deals, and and generally speaking, you want to try and just saying vibes, if it doesn't in an LP update is like you feel like you want to be a little more articulate than that. One of the things that's been sort of,
I don't run a fund.
Yeah. I mean, you don't run a fund. Yeah, you have a benefit of not running a fund, so you don't have to explain yourself. But just humor me. This is for my own edification. So I have been sort of trying to think about how do I articulate that. What the characteristics are that I'm responding to, and I'm curious if I was going to force you to I think you want, one sort of yardstick, one litmus test you mentioned, which I think is really good one, is like, could I see myself working for this person one day? Is a really good one. Are there any other, if you're going to sort of abstract it to certain characteristics that you have seen be predictive of people who end up making it work? Can you articulate what those are?
Trying to come up with a more comprehensive list. I mean, there is a particular type of intelligence, right? Like there's all kinds of smart people, but there is a form of intelligence that is expressed in the ability to influence, communicate, and be pragmatic about reality. And I don't know how to describe it, but it's like not just like logical, right? It's not just like reasoning. It's a sense of self-awareness and a almost unreasonable confidence that is grounded in reality, I think is like one general group of attributes. Another one that I'm looking for is an earned secret, right? Yep. Are they starting a company because it is a high status thing to do, which it is now, and maybe it wasn't for a year, but in Zerb times, it was an absolute high status thing to do. Like, how do you suss out the reason why people are doing what they're doing? Is it earned? Is it about more than just like doing a company, being a CEO, being a founder? Is it about innovation or impact?
On that, because I also have been sort of thinking a lot about this, about the prestige, the low status, high status thing. Like as startups have become, at least they haven't become easier to make successful, of course, but they've become easier to raise money for, arguably, at least pre-seed, seed money, just because there's 10, 50, 100 times more firms now than there were investing at those stages. One thing I'm wondering if it's a bias or a real thing, but like I've noticed there's a certain class of founder who, if you look at what they've done before, they weren't necessarily doing a lot of entrepreneurial stuff like very early on in their life. They in fact often have been on what I would describe as a prestige track, and that can be an educational one, plus X big tech company, what have you, which of course these companies hire lots of really smart people, but then they're now breaking off and they're doing a startup. And I'm increasingly coming to the conclusion that that's a bit of a red flag in a way, because what they're, for two reasons. One is if that's been the track they've been on, their peer group is likely composed of people who are on that track as well. And they are more likely to view that if the startup's not working, and God knows, like most of the time, for long periods of time, they do not work. And you sort of want a founder who doesn't care, like isn't thinking, my friend is about to make partner at X prestigious law firm or at the next rung up at McKinsey or what have you. And they're thinking, shit, all this time I'm spending on the startup's going nowhere. I'm falling behind like the prestige track. Is that a sort of an unfair prejudice, or is that, do you think do you think that instinct is perhaps justified?
I mean, it's all probability, right? And it's correlation. So no signal's 100%. Cool. But I do think that particular signal, I think you're reading it correctly. It's also been what I've seen, both in terms of, well, not necessarily in terms of investing. I actually mostly avoided that signal pretty actively, but like I get more signal more from people who, start companies with certain backgrounds. When exception to that signal, I think, is if someone's doing a enterprise B2B type of product and haven't been like a post-economic VP at some large company, those actually tend to do pretty well.
Yeah.
But, if someone's like a career mid-management, individual contributor type forever, the reason why I think that doesn't work is there's so many people that I talk to who are like, oh, I really want to be a founder. I want to do a company, but I got to do X, Y, and Z first, to learn the things I want to learn. And it's like, you know this, you don't know anything. You just have to go and learn it, and there's no better way to just go do it, right? Yeah. But some people are like, no, I got to like do X, Y, and Z. and they're just not going to be founders at all. And if they are, they're not going to be very good ones. And so there is this element of like risk taking, and you just have to do it, and you're willing to go off in the deep end. And I think it's a lot of that is not born, but it does come out of like childhood development and trauma and experiences.
Yep.
That and then a lot of founders, and they're like, oh, there's something that is the same about them that's very strange. They can't quite put your finger on, but it's I think the sort of headstrong, willing to take risks, and high agency are all part of it.
Yeah, I think that's true. Well, I think I want to thank you for joining me. This has been a clarifying conversation for me, and also this will also serve as a resource for the founders we're coaching on pitching on their raising their next round of funding. So I appreciate you contributing to our coursework on that as well. Anything you'd like to finish with about about Runway, or where can people find you on your platforms?
I'm later on Twitter, and we're runway.com. If you're a mid-sized company, sign up and we can make your finances understandable.
All right. Thanks very much, Siqi.
Thank you.